Hello, this is Adam DiProfio. I'm the change lead for the Financial Information System. Today we're going to be talking about the Index Mapping Phase 2, also called the Index Crosswalk. Back in the August Change Network meeting, we talked about items that are going to be coming up for the end user to be seeing what's happening over the next several months in the FIS project. We talked about test creation, access role mapping, training participation, but today we're going to be talking about index mapping. We've broken the index mapping into 3 phases. Phase 1, index categorization, was completed during the fiscal close process, and that's where all of the end users went through all the active index numbers and categorized why that index number exists. Today we're going to be talking about index phase 2. The index crosswalk is the process we're going to be taking all of the active index numbers, and now we're going to be assigning them to full chart strings in the new common chart of accounts. I'll briefly be talking about phase 3 later on, and that's where we'll be getting to the legacy chart stabilization. So why are we doing this? It really comes down to conversion. All of our index numbers need to be converted into the new financial chart string in the new financial system. That includes both the general ledger and the projects. And the reason for that is that we have a lot of our information today located in the index number segment. So the index numbers represent balances, purchase orders, payroll, ISIS, student billing. So there's many things that rely upon the index number, and in the new system, they need to be converted over into the new chart string. We're going to be doing a data pull as of July 1st, 2019, and there are 60,000 active index numbers as of July 1st. All 60,000 index numbers have to be mapped to the new chart string so that we can convert all of the data. One question we often get is, well, why do we have 60,000 index numbers? Well, the index number is really meant to be a shortcut for the fund, organization, and program combination on our current chart. However, we recognize that in many areas, the fund org program by itself isn't sufficient granularity for the departments to do the business they need and to get the reports they need. So for whatever reason, departments have created additional index numbers to provide the granularity that they need at the local level. So now we need to take all 60,000 index numbers and map them to the new chart strings. In the new chart string, there are 15 different chart segments, and that also includes the projects. And so the goal is to go from the granularity of the index numbers to the combination of the 15 chart segments that will provide the granularity that the departments need in the future. So what you see here is a list of all of the new chart segments in the new common chart of accounts. This includes all of the general ledger chart segments plus the project number segments as well. So this is a lot. There are 15 different segments. What I'd like to do is real quickly go through and just talk about each segment, what it means, and what the purpose is. In addition, we have a link here. You can go to the website and find the full definition of every single chart segment. So the first one is entity. This one is very easy. This is essentially the vice chancellor area. So for most areas, the entity will remain the same for all of their business. Then we have the fund, financial unit, account, and function. These are the only required fields that have to have some sort of value in the new system. Everything else is optional. So the program, the project, the location, the activity, and all of the project segments, all of those can default to a 0000 value because they're not required in the system. So really what we're going to be talking about is which combination of these chart segments will satisfy the granularity that we need in the new system. So we have the fund, financial unit, account, and function. The account is actually something that is transaction-based, so really we'll be starting with the fund, financial unit, and function. And the good news is that this actually maps very closely to what we have today in the system. We currently have a fund, and that will map to fund. We currently have organization, that will map to financial unit, and we currently have a program, and that will map to function. The project, program, location, and activity, those are all new fields we'll be talking about in a second. In addition, if something is a project, then we will have what's called a poet string. And this is going to require some learning. So the poet string is a project number, an organization, an expense type, and a task. In addition, if the project is a sponsor project, there will also be an award and a fund. So going forward, I think you'll be hearing a lot about the poet string, and this is what we're referring to. So we have a goal, and the goal is we want to have consistent use of the chart segments across campus. So what we want is that any department across campus is using the chart segments in the same way that every other department is using them. So for example, if you have faculty startup in one department, we want to make sure that everybody is using projects, and we don't want one department to decide we want to use custom program numbers, and someone else say we want function numbers, and someone else say I want a financial unit for every faculty startup. Instead, we're going to say that every single faculty startup across campus is all going to be tracked by the project. So how do we get that consistency? Well, number one, it's going to require additional understanding of what is the general ledger versus projects. So you hear project, you hear PPM. PPM stands for Project Portfolio Management, or we call it PPM or project for short. So this is going to be a little bit of a culture shift because we're used to today operating entirely in the general ledger, and in the future there will be general ledger and the project module, and we'll have to learn when things lie in one or the other. In addition, everyone's going to have to learn what the different chart segments do and what the purpose of those chart segments are. So this is going to require some learning. So very quickly, I'd just like to talk about the difference between general ledger and subledger. So today, pretty much everything lives in the general ledger. You could think of one giant bucket where all journals, all transactions, they all go to and from the general ledger. In the future state, things can be much more modular. So everything will still end up in the general ledger, but much of the transactions will be handled in the various subledgers, whether they be fixed assets, account payable, account receivable, or the project portfolio management is a subledger, and things will be living in there as well. Essentially, again, they will all end up in the general ledger, but the idea is things will be broken out in much more detail. So this is going to take some time to learn the difference between one giant bucket and now how things are going to be living in different places. So what is a project? A project is defined as a collection of financial activities for which no specific business line exists. So what does that mean? That really means local level granularity. So the idea is the general ledger is going to be housing high level financial information, and then local level granularity can be housed in the project itself. So to give an example, if I want to look at the research activity, federal research activity in the pathology department, I can do that by looking at the fund, function, and financial unit in pathology. If I want to look at chemistry's core funded instructional activity, I can do that by looking at the financial unit, fund, and function. But if I want to get more granular, I'll need to look at projects. So for instance, if I want to look at a specific NIH project in pathology, in that case, I would need a project for it. If I want to break down specific undergraduate courses in chemistry, I would need a project for that as well. So here are some high-level project types. We have sponsored research, lines of service, capital, and cost tracking. And we can provide some additional granularity and some examples of what those things might look like. So here's some examples. We have the project types on the left: sponsored, capital, lines of service, and cost tracking. We have some project classifications as to what could fit in those project types. So you could have a research sponsor project or fabrication or service agreement. Under cost tracking, you could have local level committees or courses or faculty startup. There are many, many, many examples of types of projects or reasons for projects to exist. So I'm not going to go through them all in detail because what we're going to do is go through the index mapping spreadsheet, and we'll be going through several examples that will hopefully help understand as to how and why things exist. So one question you might have is, so how do I know which chart segment values to use for each of these type of things? So to review back to our chart of accounts, there's a lot of chart segments, and some of them will live in projects, some of their granularity will live in program or location and activity. So it's going to be a little bit tricky for us all to learn as to which chart segment combinations we will use. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to start with the index categorization. So we went back a few months ago and we asked all departments to look at your index numbers and to categorize, why does this index number exist? Now what we've done is we've taken all of those categories, and there's about 30 of them, and we've built logic that says if the category is X, then these are the chart segments that you will need to populate. Then we took that logic and we built it into an index mapping spreadsheet. So when I show you the spreadsheet, and we'll be sharing them with all the Vice Chancellor areas, each row has an index number, has a category, and the spreadsheet itself has the logic built in to show you which chart segments need to be updated. So what we've tried to do is pre-populate as much as possible to make it as easy on you as possible, and then highlight the areas that you'll need to fill in yourself. And we'll see that in a little more in detail later. Now we recognize that having the logic and building the logic into the spreadsheet is not sufficient. You really need to understand why that logic exists, and then also how you need to put in some naming conventions to name your projects, tasks, and everything else. So in order to help with that, we've provided a combination of written definitions and examples of what type of categories exist and what chart segments will satisfy the granularity. We're providing this video here. We're going to be having a webinar on September 23rd. So depending on when you view this video, hopefully you'll have a chance to attend this webinar on September 23rd. And then we also we hope to use the Change Network to crowdsource some of this work. We recognize that we don't have all the answers, you don't have all the answers, but hopefully by working with your colleagues, you can bounce ideas back and forth, you can use the comments in the spreadsheet, and that together as a group, we can figure out what the right answers are and how we can make this all work. One of the areas we're providing guidelines for is the naming of projects and tasks. When a new project is created in the system, the project number will be auto-generated for you, but it'll be up to you to create a meaningful project name, a task number, and a task name. So what you see here are guidelines provided from the project's design team as to what they recommend when you set up your project name. So they're recommending that you use a 2-character or 3-character shortcut, depending on if it's sponsored projects or CN for conferences or CS for cost share, whatever is meaningful to you, and then to provide an additional description and purpose as to what the project is for. We also are recommending that you use title case, which means that you capitalize the first letter of each word, and you only use all capitals if it's an acronym. For task numbers and task names, these you need to generate yourself. So the task number, we recommend to keep it very simple. Task 1, Task 2, Task 3. If you'd like, you can actually build in a hierarchy into the task system where you can have subtasks. So you could have task 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2. We recommend you not to go too far with the tasks and subtasks, but they're there available for you. Just recognize that the task number itself will become a part of the POET string, so the longer the task number, the more you'll have to type. For the task name, very similar to the project name, we recommend to be descriptive. We also recommend for the first 3 characters, you can put down your department prefix. So here's some examples down below. What we don't recommend is to actually put the existing index number today as the beginning of your task name in the future. So the index number is truly going away. We don't recommend departments try to maintain the index number going forward, especially as we start to create new projects and new tasks. We don't want to try to maintain creating new index numbers that no longer have any meaning in the future. In addition to the project and task names, each project needs to have a start and end date and needs to have a project manager. There are additional fields that will be required for projects, but these are the bare minimum to get things started. So for start and end dates, anything that's a sponsor project, the start and end date will be populated automatically on your behalf from Koali Research. Anything that does not come from Koali Research, we are going to pre-populate to a default start date of July 1st, 2020, and we're going to say no end date. If you have a specific project with different start and end dates, there is a chance to override that in the shared mapping spreadsheet. For project manager, every project has to have a single project manager. You could think of this as either a faculty owner, if it's a project that's owned by faculty, or the person who's managing the budget. So for anything that's sponsored projects, again, this will come from Koali Research, and the project manager will be pre-populated with the PI emails address. For any non-sponsored projects, it'll be up to you to put in who the right project manager is. So if it's something that's faculty owned, like a faculty startup, again, you'll put the PI's email address. If it is not owned by faculty, then you should put the person who manages the budget. So either that'll be probably the department business officer or financial manager. And the reason why we're asking for the email address is because if you put in a name, there could be duplicative names in the system. And if you try to put the employee number is dependent upon PPS. PPS is going away. UCPath will not be having the same employee IDs. So in this case, we need to use the email address for the person. So what's our schedule? So we've rolled this out in September. We began with the change network communication of the index mapping in early September. So depending on when you're listening to this video, you might have already had your change network meeting for your group. Hopefully they've previewed this. If you haven't had your change network meeting yet, that's fine. Hopefully you'll have a chance to discuss this in more detail with your group later on. So this project is launched on September 18th, and it has a due date of October 15th. So we're giving you roughly a month to get everything done. We recognize there's going to be a lot of questions, so we want to have a webinar as quickly as possible. So we're launching this on the 18th, and then we'll have a webinar on the following Monday from 1 to 2:30, and that's on September 23rd. So depending on when you view this video, if it's before September 23rd, please make sure that you get into the system, try out the shared spreadsheet, play around a little bit so that you have a chance to ask some questions at the webinar. So what do we expect you to do? So there's going to be a lot of information here, but essentially we're going to break it down into small chunks. So what we expect you to do is, number one, familiarize yourself with the chart segments. What do they mean? What are some examples? What are the naming conventions? And that's really going to be for everyone, because this is really the beginning of understanding how things are going to be set up in the new system. Then what you're going to do is to work with your change network and find out where your shared spreadsheet is and who is going to be actually working in the shared spreadsheet. There are some areas, including the physicians group, population health, and the medical center, where the end users themselves will not be doing the index mapping, and that will be done centrally. So before you go into the shared spreadsheet and make edits, please work with your change network to ensure how the edits are going to be done and who's going to be making the changes. So once you get into the shared spreadsheet, you're going to want to go through, review the index numbers, filter them by index category, and start mapping them one by one. One thing we want all the departments to do is to look at their existing index numbers and decide, do they really need to exist in the new system? So we've had decades and decades to add new index numbers to the system, and so here's our chance to collapse, consolidate. So if you have multiple index numbers and maybe they don't need to all exist anymore, it's okay to go ahead and collapse them into one. Then when you're done, you will mark each row as complete, and when you're completely done, you will contact your change network let them know that everything's all done. So let's talk about the index mapping spreadsheet itself in a little bit more detail. So we've broken out a file for each vice chancellor area, and in that file we have a tab for each high-level org or org level 2. What we'd like you to do is to look at the spreadsheet itself, review the columns, familiarize yourself with the fields. And then when you begin the work, we recommend that you filter by your organization code and then filter by index category. We've tried to make this as easy as possible by pre-populating as many fields as we can. So anything that is not red is pre-populated for you, and you just need to review it and make sure it's correct. Anything that is red means that it needs a user to update something in the system. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but UCPath is also going to require reverse mapping of index numbers. So for any unique chart string combination, there needs to be a single index number to map it to. As soon as you've finished mapping that index number, you can mark it as correct. If you have questions, in the shared spreadsheet itself, there's a section for comments. So you can enter in comments, and they will go to anyone else who can view the spreadsheet. If you need to ask something specifically to me, you can tag @AdamDeProfio, and it will send me a message, and I can respond direct. In addition, there are some things that shouldn't go to me, and you can put in a help ticket, and I'll have more information about that a little bit later. So please don't email me direct. And then when you're done, inform your change network contact that you're complete. And then once the entire file is done, we can save it and merge it into the updated file. So I briefly want to talk about reverse mapping. I recognize that we haven't even started the beginning of the index mapping itself, and I'm already talking about reverse mapping. It's a little confusing, but I want to highlight it now, and then when we go through the spreadsheet, we'll go through some examples of what it looks like. So as you've probably heard, UCPath is launching on May 2020. And UCPath will only be using the new chart string and the poet string. It will not be using index numbers. However, we're still going to be on FIS for May and June. So what that means is for the 2 final months of the 1920 year, UCPath will only be accepting chart and project strings, but it needs to be converted back into FIS. Every unique chart and project string has to map back to a single index number. So as we mentioned before, the goal is to have some index numbers be collapsed and merged into a single chart and project string. But in those cases, we need to determine which index number should map back to. And again, we'll go through some examples in a second. For any index number that is not being consolidated or collapsed, the reverse mapping should be pretty straightforward, but there will still need to be an index number mapped back for everything. So let's look at an example. So let's say I have a fictitious index number, ABC1234, and I made up some new chart segment values that this will map to in the new system. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This will be on project 1 and task 1. Now let's say I have a second index number, ABC2345. This is going to mostly the same chart string, but in this case it's going to be task 2. So now when we get to UCPath, we can take the first chart string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, project 1, task 1, and that will map back to ABC1234. No problem. I can now have the exact same chart string, except in this case, it's not exactly the same because it's task 2, and that will map back to ABC2345. Again, this is not a problem. But now what if I consolidate? What if I take ABC1234 and I map it to that chart string, but I determine the department, I don't really need ABC2345 anymore, so I can also map that back to the same task 1. So this is great. We want to collapse. We want to consolidate. But now when UCPath takes that full chart string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, project 1 and task 1, it's not going to know which index number to post back to into IFIS. So in that case, for that chart string, the department user is going to have to pick one index number, either ABC1234 or ABC2345, and enter it. If that doesn't make sense, that's okay. We'll go through some examples in a little bit. So let's take a look at the spreadsheet. So what we're seeing here is the index mapping shared spreadsheet. This is the one for academic affairs, so everyone's individual data will look slightly different than this file. But what I want to do is to walk through some specific examples, even if those examples don't necessarily apply to your department, but just to show you how the spreadsheet works, what logic is in place, and what the steps are for you to do. So the first thing I'd like to do is actually review the spreadsheet, go through all the columns, there's a lot there, and just let you know why they're there and what the purpose is. So we'll start at the very beginning. This first column is for you. When you have completed an entire row and the index is mapped, you can go through and change this from an N to a Y to mark that it's yes, it's complete. The next one is a highlighted cell that shows if there's something that you have to enter. So the very first thing to see on the spreadsheet is anything that's red means that somewhere in the file or in that row, there is something for you to update. So for all of these that are not red, all you have to do is review. For anything that is red, you will go through to the columns to the right, and then anything that's red is what you need to update. Everything else is just review. So again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible by pre-populating as much of the information as possible. So then we have the index title, and then we have the index category that you provided back in the June and July timeframe. We have a section here for the reverse map, and we'll go over that in a little bit. And then we have all of the legacy chart information. So we have the index status, we have your vice chancellor area, we have the fund and fund title, we have the organization title, the program title, and that's it. So for now, I'm going to hide this. So I expect that most of you are familiar with your fund organization code, and so you will keep all of that hidden just to make the spreadsheet a little bit easier to navigate. For this exercise, I will collapse and expand depending on what we need to show. So now we have all of these columns in blue. These are all of the new chart of accounts segments. So we have the entity and the entity title. So in this case, this is our vice chancellor area. We have the fund and fund title. We have the financial unit title. We have the function. We have the program. We have the location. We have the activity. And we have the project. Beyond that, anything that's green is if there's a project, there's the additional information, what we call for the POET. We need the expenditure org, we need the task, we need, if it's a sponsor project, the award and funding source. And then we also need start dates, end dates, and a project manager. So essentially, every single index number has to have all of those blue columns filled out with something. And then anything that's a project also has to have data filled in for these green columns. As we're going through this, you might see there's actually not that many red cells. Most of them are pre-populated for you. And then we'll go through some examples to show you specifically what you need to do. So now what I'd like to do is go through some examples, look at some different index categories, and show you how the logic of the spreadsheet is built in. So before I do that, I would like to show you that by default, the index status is only looking at active index numbers. So again, this data pull is as of July 1st, 2019. We pulled all index numbers that were in the system as of that date, but we're only asking you to map things that are active. Some departments have asked if they could map some of their recently inactivated index numbers. They're welcome to do that. It's not required. So if someone would like to, you can go to the index status, unfilter by active, allow the inactive fields, inactive index numbers to show up, and map those optionally. For everyone else, I expect you will just map to the active index numbers. So what I would like to do is let's take an example department. I'm going to start with electrical and computer engineering. So I'm going to filter, and there's many ways to filter on the spreadsheet. And here we see all of the index numbers for electrical and computer engineering. So we can see all the different categories. And I'm going to start with one of the easier ones. So I'm going to filter. And let's look at the chart string shortcut. So in this case, what this means is this index number exists, and it is the only index number that exists on this fund, organization, and program combination. So in this case, there was no additional granularity needed, and so there's only one single index number for concurrent enrollment and fees. And you and your department might not know what concurrent enrollment fees, doesn't really matter for this exercise. We're just going to go through and show you what the steps are. So the first thing to notice is there's nothing that I actually have to do in order to, there's no fields I have to enter in order to map. It's really just review. So I will go one by one through all of the Oracle chart segments and review them. So the first thing is, this is the entity, which equals to academic affairs. That looks correct. There's this fund 14801, and which is concurrent enrollment fees. Now, you're not going to know that 14801 is the concurrent enrollment fund. If you would like, we have all of the reference pages down here where you can go to the tab for fund and you can search for concurrent enrollment. And you can search for concurrent enrollment. And it shows you that it's 14801. Now we don't want you to have to do that for every single fund yourself, so we pre-populated it for you. So just review it. It makes sense. It's still the same. The financial unit, this is a financial unit for electrical and computer engineering, so that looks good. The function is 401, which is general academic instruction. That looks good. In this case, there's no program, no location, no activity, no project, and I'm good to go. So now what I will do is everything has to be reverse mapped. I will say it's a single index number for this chart string. Therefore, if there's any activity on this full chart string, it will point back to ECE 0086, and this one is done. We've completed one. So the chart string shortcut should be pretty straightforward. Now let's look at an example that's a little bit more complicated. So let's take a look at these sponsored projects. So the first thing to notice is that now there is something required for the end user to do. So you still have all the fields in white to review, and there will be some additional fields in red in order to enter some information. So I don't recommend doing this in the department, but just to keep this cleaner on the demonstration, I'm going to look at just a single fund at a time. As you're going through your department, I would recommend not filtering individual by fund. It'll go quicker, but in this case, I want to keep it nice and clean. So this is a sponsor project. I'm going to scroll over to the Oracle Financial Information. Just like before, all of the fields in blue are pre-populated for me. Academic affairs. In this case, all federal contracts and grants are going under the same fund, 20,000. The financial unit is still ECE. In this case, the function is 440 for research. There's no program. There's no location, there's no activity, but now we have a project. And as you can see, the project name is highlighted. So before, if there's something that does not have a project, then it'll be project number 0000. If something requires a project, then we will create a project number for you. So in this case, we put a value that says auto-populate to show you that yes, there will be a project number, but you don't need to create it yourself. However, you will need a project name. So by default, we copied the name of the fund, but we recognize that's probably not really the best name that you want to have for your project. So now what I'd like to do is flip back to the slides before where we showed some of the project naming guidelines. So here are the project naming guidelines. So in this case, what I'm going to do is the project type is a sponsor project. So I'm going to start with an SP, and then I'm going to put a description and purpose as to what this is for. So in this case, it's sponsor project SP, and I'm going to call this, that is the faculty member's name. Notice I'm not doing it all in caps, but this is an acronym that I am, and that is my project name. You'll also notice it's no longer red, which means I've updated this, but the user entry required is still red, which means there's additional fields that we will need. So now because this is a project, there's now information that's required in the POET string. Again, some of this information we've auto-populated for you. So the expenditure org maps to the financial unit. And now we have a task number and task name. So in this case, you will have to enter in a task number and you have to enter in a task name. So in this case, there's only one index number, so let's keep this simple and call it task 1. For the task name, I'm going to go back to the naming guidelines. And I can see that for task name, the group recommends putting the prefix for the department and then putting something descriptive for the task itself. So I'm not familiar with this task, but I will just go ahead and put ECE AROD task 1. Hopefully there's something more descriptive or meaningful to the faculty. Is it the sensors grant? Is it the liver cancer grant? Something else that can make it meaningful for someone in the task name. Now if you notice, the user entry required went away, which means there's nothing else here that I need to enter because all of this is going to be auto-populated from Koali Research. So in that case, I come back here, it's a single instance. I can reverse map it, and I'm done. Let's go through another example. So now I'm going to look at a different fund, still a sponsor project. And this one has multiple index numbers. So I'm not familiar with this project itself, but it's a DARPA, which is a federal sponsored project. And I'm just going to go through and map this as best I can, even though I don't really know the purpose of all of these index numbers. So I'm going to go over to the chart segments just like before. All of the blue fields pre-populate. I'll review them to make sure they look correct. It's all research. No program, no location, no activity. And again, the project title, the project number will auto-populate with something, but we need a project name. So we'll call this sponsor project, SP for sponsor project, and I'll call this Feynman DARPA. And that is going to be the name for the entire project. So all 4 of these index numbers are all going to be mapped So in this case, this project name is what we're going to use for all 4 of these index numbers. So again, the poet string starts to populate, but in this case, I need to put in the task numbers. Now, I don't know enough about these index numbers themselves, but let's just pretend for the story that we still need one task for the main activity. We need a separate task for whoever this person is, and a separate task for whoever this person is. But when I look at this and I think we probably don't need a task for travel itself, because in this case, we can use a count code in order to determine what the travel is. There might be a perfectly good reason for this to exist, but just for this example, we're going to pretend that this travel index number no longer needs to exist and can be merged with the main one. So what I will do is I will have task 1 be the main, and we'll call this ECE Feynman DARPA task 1. I would give it a meaningful name if I knew it. This will be task 2. This will be task 3. In this case, I will change this to be the other person's name. And I would do the same thing down below. But now I have this one here. So I want to get rid of this index number. Obviously, it still exists. It needs to be converted. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the exact same task number and task name and copy it over. So now what's going to happen is these 4 index numbers are going to be merged into task 1, 2, and 3. And this, all activity on this index number and all activity on this index number are both going to be merged into this chart string in the new system. So now I'll finish going through, checking everything else, make sure they look good, nothing else required. But now here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So I need to reverse map back for UC Path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say anything on this unique chart string will go back to ECE2043. That's task 1. This is task 2. This is task 3. But now for this one is also task 1. So if I were to use ECE20TR, when we take this full chart string with task 1 and put it back in the system, it's not going to know which index number to use, and that will essentially bomb out. So what I need to do is I need to change this to also be ECE2043. So if we think of this in one direction, these index numbers are merging to these chart strings, and these chart strings are merging back to whatever is located here. So this is an example of when we want to reverse map and we want to take into account when we merged index numbers into one. So now we've looked at an example for something that's in the general ledger. We've looked at a sponsor project. Now let's go ahead and look at a non-sponsor project. So I'm going to go ahead and unfilter by fund. And then let's take a look at one example of a non-sponsor project, and we'll do courses. I recognize not everyone has courses in their department, but that's fine. We're just using this for an example. So let's look at courses, and let's look at courses that are only on our SOFI fund, core funds. So in this case, ECE has decided that they have these various ECE courses, and they needed to track the activity separate, so they created individual index numbers for each of them. So now when I look through and I scroll over to the new chart segments, almost all of the blue segments, the values are going to be identical. They're all going to be academic affairs. They're all going to be the new SOFI fund. They're all going to be ECE. They're all going to be function 401, which is general academic instruction. They're all going to be the same program number, location, and activity. Which means as of now, if we stop there and try to convert all of these index numbers would get merged into one same general ledger chart string, and we'd lose all this granularity. So how do we get the detail that the department wants for these courses? In this case, we're going to create a project. So just like before, what we've done is based on the index category, we know that something that's a course is a project, and so we'll auto-populate a project number for you, and then it's up to you to put what the project name should be. So I'm going to call this course for the shortcut. And then I will call this ECE undergrad courses. And then I will use that for all of the ones that are undergrad. And then this down here is actually a grad course. So in this example, I'm separating a project for undergrad and grad just to show you. It might make more sense in the department just to have one that says ECE courses, but just to show you how it works. So now the expenditure org populates, and now we need task numbers and task names. So I will call this one task 1, I will call this task 2, task 3, and we'll give each course its own task number. And then for the name, we will call it ECE undergrad 5, and then we'll call this one 16. And I could go on down the list. Now if I keep scrolling to the right, this is not a sponsor project, so there's no award, there's no funding source, but it needs a start and end date. So now normally the start and end date for sponsor projects gets pre-populated by Kowali. In this case, this is a course, it's a non-sponsor project, there is no Kowali data to pull from, so in this case we need to populate a start and end date ourselves. So what we've done is, we've said all of the projects by default will start on July 1st, 2020, and they will have no end date. In addition, if for some reason this is not the right start date or end date, then I'll have a chance to override it, and I'll go through that in a little bit. So we've defaulted to a start date of July 1st, 2020, and an end date of none. There will be an option to override that if you need to. But we also have to put in a project manager. So if this is a faculty-controlled activity, then we will put in the email of the faculty. In this case, since it is owned by the department, we will put either the department financial manager or MSO. In this case, I'm just going to put in my own email address. So now I reverse map it. And this one's complete. Now I'd like to give another example as to what if a department wants to merge and consolidate index numbers. So in this case, we have index numbers for every single ECE course. What if they wanted to merge it and say all undergraduate courses together in a single index number, or maybe all lower division? So in this case, I could change the project title to be ECE undergraduate courses, and then we could say ECE task 1, and we'll call it undergraduate lower division. And in this case, these are both lower division courses. So ECE 5, 16, and 35, anything that's less than 100 is lower division. So now in this case, all three of these index numbers are going to be merged into one single task. So now I have to reverse map. And because I consolidated, I have to point back to the exact same index number because the new chart string needs to be able to point back to just one index number itself. So now that we've looked at a chart string shortcut, we've looked at general ledger, we've looked at a sponsor project and a non-sponsor project, let's take a look at a few of those other options where there are the optional chart segment values as well. So let's go ahead and clear our filters. In this case, I'm going to take a look for program. So we have a chart segment for program, and this is for UC-wide programs. So the Office of the President has given us a list, and here are all of the UC system-wide programs. And the Office of the President would like us to be able to report on all of these, and so we have a specific chart segment that allows us to group these across all of campus. So in this case, Cosmos is one of the UC programs, UC system-wide programs, and so it shows me there's something I need to update. So just like everything else, I will scroll to the right, take a look at my chart segments. I'm still academic affairs. This has its own unique fund number for Cosmos. I'm still in electrical and computer engineering. I have a function. And if you notice, the program field is now updated. So in this case, this is saying that this is a UC system-wide program. We knew that because of the category, but there's no way for us to auto-populate what the right program number is. So in that case, a person has to go in and do it. So what I can do is I can go to the Program Reference tab, and I can search for Cosmos. And I can see that Cosmos is 28A. So now I can put in 28A, and it does have the drop-down menu right there as well. And it will auto-fill in Cosmos for me. Now I can keep going. I see there's nothing else I need to do. I reverse map it. And I am good to go. So there are many other options and index categories we could go over. One thing I would like to look at is actually something about location. And electrical and computer engineering does not use ships and locations. So what I'd like to do is take a look at the category called ships. This is for our friends down in SIO. And they have specific index numbers set up for each of their research vessels. So we have a location chart segment that says anything that is a ship will map to the appropriate location for that ship itself. So in this case, the research vessel Melville. We scroll to the right. We see this is now the entity of marine science for SIO for the Vice Chancellor. They have the fund. They have their financial unit, their function, program. In this case, the location field is being highlighted. So now what I'll do is I will go to the location tab. I will search for Melville. and I see that the Melville is S20000. I'll put that in here. And it populates the title for me and now shows me that I'm all complete. So again, I will reverse map. I got that right. Mark it as complete. So you might be asking yourself, how does the system know which chart segments to update? And it's all based off of the logic that we have for the index categories. So we have in our first tab a list of all of the index categories that are currently available. There are roughly 30 of them. We provided the definition, and we provided an example as to what type of things the index category could represent. And then what happens is, depending on what you put here under the index category cell, it will change the logic for you. So for instance, let's go back to our ECE department. We will unfilter by ships. We will take a look at ECE. And let's go back to our chart string shortcut. So let's just pretend, let's make up and say that this gift that came in from Sony is actually for fellowships. So at the time when someone was going through the index categorization, they said this is a unique chart string, therefore everything should be perfectly fine. But let's just pretend somebody realizes now, oops, that should have been a fellowship. Now what we're saying is for non-sponsored projects that fellowships, those need to be on a project. So what I will do is I will change it to whatever the correct index category is. And now you can see automatically it's told us, oh, because this is a fellowship, you need to add some additional information somewhere to the right. So now I'll go through and I will look and say, what is it that needs to be populated? So in this case, it said, because this is a fellowship, we want all non-sponsored project fellowships to be handled in a project. So it no longer says 0000, and it now says we're going to create a project number for you, but you're going to need a name. So we will do project type, we'll call it fellowship, and I will call it Sony Fellowship. It might have a better name, but just in this example. Now, because it's a project, it's pre-populated this on the fly. I'll call it task number 1, and I'll call this not a very descriptive name. I go through, start date and end date pre-populate. I put in my email address as the project manager. I reverse map, and I'm good to go. So now at this point, we've gone through many different examples of index categories and how that can look in the general ledger, the project module, sponsor projects, non-sponsor projects, and I'm sure you still have a lot of questions. So what I'd like to do is, if you have comments or questions or concerns, this is a shared document. You can go to the comment section. First thing you can see is if there are any other comments sent in by your colleagues, you can look at them, see if they have questions similar to you, or maybe you can even respond direct to their comments themselves. So in this case, Adam asked, where can you get the information about the program codes? And I, as Adam, can respond back. If you want to send something to your colleagues, you can do it here. If you want to send something specifically to me, you can tag me by putting @ and then you type in Adam, my name will show up, and then whatever you put here, whatever you type in, you click submit, and this will tag me, flag me, and I will come back and respond to it. So my hope is that between all of us, we can work together as a team in order to help each other out as needed. So this really is the best way to get a response from me. Please try not to email me. I get lots and lots of emails. They could easily get buried. So if you need response from me, go ahead and put it here in the comment section. In addition, there are certain things that I don't know. If it's a question about the chart of accounts and values, then I'll show you in a minute how to submit an Ask Help ticket into General Accounting. So what are the next steps? Well, first of all, we have a webinar on September 23rd from 1 to 2:30. There'll be Zoom information available on the website. We recognize you have a lot of questions. That's okay. We'll work through it. Bring your questions to the webinar, and then we'll also discuss future office hours or additional information that we can share in the future. I briefly want to mention Index Mapping Phase 3, which is chart stabilization. That's going to be coming soon. I don't want to go to it in too much detail, partly because we don't have all the answers yet, and partly I would really like to focus on Phase 2 as much as possible. But I recognize that you might want to understand what the next steps are so that you can figure out what you need to do today. So one thing we'll need to do is, when a new index number is created in the future, we will need to map it at the time it's created. For conversion, all index numbers have to be mapped, and we'll be creating new index numbers from today all the way through July 2020. So anytime a new index number is created, it will have to be mapped, which means we will need a new process in order to map index numbers at the time they are requested and or created. In addition, whenever we have that new process in place, there's going to be a gap. So the information we pulled was as of July 1st, 2019. From July 1st up until the day that we have some new process, there will be additional index numbers that are created, which means we'll have to go back, grab the additional index numbers that were brand new over the last 2.5 months, and then map those as well. And then as a final spot, there could be some inactive index numbers that need to be mapped. We're hoping this is a very small amount, but there are still some inactive index numbers that have open purchase orders or balances, or they're tied to an endowment that has a payout. In that case, all of that information has to be converted over, and so there will be a subset of inactive index numbers that likely will have to be caught up when we get into Phase 3 as well. So if you have questions, as I showed before, you can go ahead and in the shared spreadsheet, you can put in a comment, you can put @Adam and it'll send it to me. There's certain things that I am not the expert on. There's lots of things I'm not the expert on. If you have a question on the common chart of accounts or the poet string or the design, something needs to go to the design team, then I'm going to ask that you put in an Ask Help ticket. So there's instructions here on when and where you should put it in. And then we have a screenshot where you can go to askucsd.edu, or you can look at from Blink. And then you can put in the subject, the description, and then the categories down there at the bottom. We'll flag it to the appropriate person in General Accounting or OPAFs or someone else on the design team. So to conclude, first thing I'd like to offer is a reminder. This is really the beginning of you learning about how the new system is going to be set up. I know you have questions, and we'll do our best to answer them in the webinar and other future communications. But please understand, we don't have the answers to everything yet. I recognize and I appreciate that you're going to want to understand all of the future implications of reporting, downstream applications, but really we're not there yet. So at this point, I'm asking you to do the best you can, deal with ambiguity, deal with the gray areas, and try to get this done to the best of your ability. I'd also like to provide a big thank you to everyone who worked on this. You're hearing my voice, but there are many, many people who worked behind the scenes to get this done. I'm not going to name everyone, as I'm sure, number one, it would take too long, and number two, I'd leave people out. But there are the design leads, the change management team, the data conversion team, project management, and many, many other people who worked on getting the index mapping to where it is today to make it as easy for you as possible. I do want to give one shout out to somebody who coincidentally is actually not on the FIS project, and that's Adrian Peterson in Academic Affairs. He's the one that built all the logic into the shared spreadsheet. So as you're going through, changing your index categories and having the spreadsheet tell you what to update and what can auto-populate, you can thank Adrian for all that work. And then finally, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for all your efforts that you're putting in towards this project. I appreciate the amount of work this is going to take, and I really want to thank you for working with your colleagues in the Change Network. Together, we'll all be able to get this done. So thank you and good luck.